My name is Grace Reilly, and today I am joined by Dr. Paul Kengor, who is the editor of the American Spectator, professor at Grove City College, and the director of the Institute for Faith and Freedom. He is the best-selling author of something like over 20 books. He's written more since I last checked, but today we're going to be talking specifically about his interview that he had with Dr. Jordan Peterson of his book, The Devil and Karl Marx. Dr. Kengor, thank you so much for joining me.
The great Grace. It is good to be with you again, one of my all-time favorite students, and now our premier video journalist for the American Spectator.
And the all-time favorite professor for me. Dr. Kengor's been so amazing and such an amazing influence in my life. So it's always so
Thank you.
great to talk to you. Yeah,
It's
well, just to start, so Jordan Peterson has famously said that before you criticize the world, you should get your own house in order. And your book, The Devil and Karl Marx, does an excellent job showing how Karl Marx did just the opposite of that. His house was by no means in order, and the way that he lived his life and the philosophies that drove him to what later led to his destructive ideologies say a lot and are worth looking into. And you talked about this with Jordan Peterson. Tell us a bit about this experience and just that concept of order that Peterson focuses on so much.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this came about, right? So I of course know who Jordan Peterson is, right? He's famous. The guy has like 8 million, I think, followers or subscribers to his show. In fact, that interview that we did a few weeks ago now, by the way, we did it at the Museum of the Bible. Interestingly, we can pick up with that in a few minutes, but it has like 400,000 views, I think. Right now at this moment, and probably more by the time this is posted. But that line was so John Miltimore, who's a writer for FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, and he reviewed my book, The Devil and Karl Marx. And in doing the review, he used that line from Peterson, right, about order, disorder, and it was really clever. It was really a clever way to lead that review. So Peterson got a hold of that review and posted it on his X account, his Twitter account, and I think John Miltimore informed me. I think he said, "Hey, look, Jordan Peterson posted this." I thought, "Oh, wow, cool, right?" And then at some point, I don't know how he got a hold of my book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Peterson, but he got a hold of it, and I didn't send it to him personally, but I got a request shortly after that, maybe a week or two, and I've had to back up a little bit more. I was Peterson had just interviewed Dennis Quaid, who plays Reagan in our Reagan movie. So Reagan, the movie, is based on my book, The Crusader, Ronald Reagan, The Fall of Communism. It comes out on August 20th. So Peterson interviewed Dennis Quaid about the movie, and somebody informed me of that, and I thought, okay, I better watch that. I better watch that. So I watched that Peterson interview with Quaid. It was really good. And my wife and I were driving back from New York after dropping my daughter off there. And you know how in the queue, they start sending you other different videos. And one popped up of Jordan Peterson with Matt Fradd of Pints with Aquinas, which is a great podcast. In fact, I did that one as well on communism probably a year or two ago.
I'll
And
have
so
to
that
link
was,
that too, because that would be really interesting to watch.
yeah, it's really good. Matt Fradd is really great. He's Australian. He lives in Steubenville, Ohio, near the campus of Franciscan University. So my wife and I listened to that interview of Peterson by Matt Fradd, Pints with Aquinas. I think it was like 2 hours long. We had a pin above below the radio there, driving back, and I couldn't watch it because I was driving, but I was listening, and I thought. Wow, I see why people like Peterson so much, right? I mean, the guy is really engaging, really interesting, really candid, says what's on his mind, highly informed, educated, intellectual, articulate, and just all around engaging. So listen to that, and I think that was maybe a Saturday. And at that point in my life, I listened to Peterson maybe a handful of times over the years. And I think it was a Sunday afternoon before Memorial Day, maybe. And I just happened to check my email. Yeah, I checked it on Memorial Day. And an email came in on the Sunday from his producer asking me if I could do the show, I think the next day. And I thought, first of all, it's amazing that I'm even seeing this because it's Memorial Day. But then I said to my wife, "So, wow, look, I got a request to do Jordan Peterson show." And I wasn't sure if it would be about maybe the Reagan movie, maybe the Marx book, maybe communism. So it turned out, and I really didn't know until I got there and into the studio to meet with him, that I brought a copy of The Crusader with me, the Ronald Reagan book, copy of the American Spectator with me, and a copy of the Devil and Karl Marx book. And I signed him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I read that book. That's what we're going to talk about." And I said, "All right, good." In fact, his team told me he likes to be spontaneous, and I do too. I don't like anybody to tell me ahead of time what the questions are. So we ended up doing this deep dive on the book The Devil and Karl Marx, and he started right off in that interview, Grace, as you saw, by talking about asking his students to write a kind of biographical, autobiographical portrait of themselves, what they believe, what they think. And he said that in many of the cases, they would choose to write a poem. And I thought, oh wow, I know where he's going with this, right? And at that point, the people watching the video don't realize that. And where he went with that was Marx's poetry, because as you know, I mean, you've read that book, and we used it in one of my courses at Grove City College, my course on Marxism. In fact, you read the book before the course, and that book talks about Marx's literally diabolical poetry. I mean, the guy wrote poems about the devil, and sometimes put himself in the person of the devil. I shall howl gigantic curses at mankind. Right, this violinist called the player, who's like summoning up in a demonic frenzy the powers of darkness in front of his love interest Jenny, who ends up being, or in this case of Marx, right, his love interest was Jenny, his future wife, and see this sword, this blood dark sword that shall stab unerringly within thy soul. The Prince of Darkness sold it to me. So there's really chilling stuff.
And
So
Jordan
people,
Peterson, he characterized it really well whenever he was interviewing you. He called it a Faustian ethos of
yeah.
cynic poetry that was driving Marx, and then later would explain how he came to some of the conclusions and ideologies that he did, but just how important these poetic fantasies of the devil and of destruction were.
Right, and he said, so I think right off, I may have mentioned that Peterson said Marx had this favorite quote from Goethe's Faust, the Mephistopheles character, the devil demon character: "Everything that exists deserves to perish." Right, and at that point, Peterson almost jumped out of his seat and said, "Yes, yes, I've read Faust, I've read Goethe 1 and 2, parts 1 and 2." So he knew that. He knew that up and down. So here was somebody who understood that when Karl Marx said, "Yeah, that's my favorite poem. I wanted to be," he basically wanted to be like the Goethe of his age. What's my favorite quote? If somebody asked Marx, Marx said, "The Mephistopheles character, the demon devil character," and Peterson, bam! I mean, he was on that. He understood. So it clicked with him. And one of the things that Peterson is most interested in, I think, aside from religion, in fact, his current tour is called Wrestling with God, is communism. He realizes how genuinely evil it is, and he
He said,
doesn't shy away
actually,
from that.
yeah, he said in the interview with you that the horrors of communism are what drove him to look so deeply into religious matters, because he saw the evils that existed with communism. And he made a really good point as well, based on what you just mentioned, that it's not nihilism that Marx was immersed in. It was a worship of destruction. That's what Peterson said. And
Right.
it's much more than that. Yes, calling for everything that exists to perish. That's a really extreme stance to take, and that's worth taking a look at. And that's one of the things that's so great about Jordan Peterson. He takes this very unique and thought-provoking approach to every issue or person that he interviews, where he really does look deeper into what kinds of philosophies or worldviews or upbringings or what have you have impacted the thought processes of the people he's interviewed. And of course, looking at Marx, it was a really great and thought-provoking conversation, with your book being this perfect expose into what the dark life of Marx really looked like.
Yeah, and he's a really thoughtful guy. And by the way, I liked him. I liked him a lot. I thought he was a really good guy. And I mean, he's truly a truth seeker, right? I mean, that's yeah, that's not hyperbole or sugarcoating or why. I don't know. I'm not putting it quite the right way, but he's truly interested in seeking the truth. And like right now, I know a lot of people, not just right now, but probably the last couple of years, everyone's trying to figure out, right, Grace, is he a Christian? Has he become a believer?
Been quite a debate. He's been asked many times, not always enjoyed the questions, but has always given very thoughtful answers.
Right. And at one point in the Matt Fradd interview, Matt Fradd really tries to pin him down on maybe Christianity generally, maybe Catholicism,
Especially with
because
his wife converting to Catholicism.
that's right. That's right. And at one point, Peterson in that interview says, "That's all I've got for you, man. That's all I've got for you." So it's pretty clear that he doesn't want to go that far. And some people have said to me, I think he's being insincere. I mean, the guy seems like a Christian. He knows so much about the Bible. I mean, he really does. He's so insightful. He understands the Christian message. He talks about Jesus carrying the cross. If you want to follow me, pick up your cross and carry me. So people have said to me, there's no way that somebody can get it like he does and not be a believer. And I'm kind of inclined to believe that. Like if I left that interview thinking to myself, he's got to be a Christian. I mean, he's got to be there. If he's not, now I know one person, a cynic said to me, well, more than one person said, well, he's not ready to say that yet because his brand is the truth seeker. He's a seeker. He's wrestling with God. And this will kind of mess up his brand, right? And I said, well, that's a cynical way to look at it. But I think it could also be with Peterson that this guy has been on such an intellectual journey his entire life. I think now he's in his early 60s, maybe 61, 62 years old, that when he makes that leap of faith, which in his case probably won't be a leap of faith because I think he's right there on the edge, ready to step in, he wants to be 100% sure. Because if he chooses in all this truth seeking and all these different religions and philosophies that he's going to follow the faith of Jesus Christ, that's going to be it. He's not going to do something else 10 years from now. So he wants to be absolutely sure that he's in before he's in.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think he has given thoughtful answers a lot whenever he's been asked the question.
right, right.
Speaks more to that, where it seems like he is genuinely wrestling and wanting to be absolutely certain. But obviously, he does see a lot. He sees a lot that a lot of people miss deeper that would point towards a higher power or that would point towards Christian values. So there's something to be said for that too. And I think that's why so many people are intrigued because they see that he sees things at this different level than I'd say the normal person would. So it's just really intriguing and
And,
it's
and I and I think you probably agree with me on this, right? If he, first of all, when he comes into the faith or the church, lowercase c church, uppercase c church, whatever that might be, he's going to bring a lot of people with him.
yeah.
But he'll also lose a lot of people who probably enjoy the wrestling with God with him, right? Who are still kind of seeking themselves and are kind of open to it. Uh, on I've been asked too since then, where do you think he would go if he became a Christian? Would he be a Protestant evangelical? He talks a lot about Luther and in a positive way. Would he become Catholic like his wife? I don't know. Although the one thing that popped up at the end of our interview, I don't know if you saw this, he clearly doesn't like Pope Francis, and especially sees Francis as you know not a Marxist, not a communist, but maybe pro-communist. And I told him, I said, there's a quote from Pope Francis in December 2013 where he said, the Marxist ideology is wrong. But then Francis says, but I've met a lot of good people who are Marxists. And those of us who follow this stuff with Pope Francis know, okay, he might not be a Marxist, but he's not a very good anti-communist, right? He seems almost pro-communist or sympathetic to it, even if he's not. And so Peterson doesn't like that about Francis, even though the Catholic Church from the time of Pope Pius IX, with the encyclical Qui Pluribus in December 1846, 2 years before the Communist Manifesto was published, has all these great statements from all the popes opposing communism. He knows that Francis isn't very good on the subject. And then he also said at the end of the interview, he said, what about liberation theology? I said, yeah, liberation theology, it's bad. It's a heresy. And it was followed by, and still is, by a lot of kind of Latin American Jesuits, which is where Cardinal Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis, came from. So those things, I think, are a turnoff to the Catholic Church for him. I could see him, if he were to become Catholic, doing it after the death of Pope Francis. In fact, I think as a Catholic that a lot of people are going to come into the Catholic Church after the death of Francis, because a lot of conservatives don't like Francis. But that said, whether he would become Catholic or Protestant, I think Peterson clearly is on his way into the Christian faith generally. And I'd be surprised if he's not already there. But if he hasn't made a commitment yet, again, for the aforementioned reasons we talked about before, maybe that's why he hasn't made a commitment yet.
Yeah, well, and the other interesting thing too, and I feel like your interview with him was probably thought-provoking, just in the sense that you guys talked about a lot of really interesting things. One thing that stood out to me was whenever you mentioned, obviously, the God-shaped vacuum, where communists approach that saying that it's you said this, and it was a great point, saying it's a money-shaped vacuum and that
Yeah.
economics is the answer to everything. And Peterson recognized that, of course, that's ridiculous, and he recognizes the kind of the ways that human nature plays into things. He recognizes some of what Christians identify as eternal truths. So I think that's why so many people are on the edge of their seats, waiting to.
Yeah. Well, and that statement, right? You're right. I remember this when I said to him, no, it's the communists. You guys are obsessed with money, right? You're obsessed with the material. You're obsessed with
And they
capital.
love to say that everyone else is the one obsessed with money, where they're putting people into the economic boxes, into the oppressor and oppressed boxes.
Yes, that's that's their alpha and omega, right? If you solve the economic problem, the material problem, and I said to Peterson, they want to fashion a golden calf out of capital. He's like, yes, yes. And when he mentioned the temptation of Christ by Satan, which he mentions, I think, often in his talks, because I've only seen a few of them on this subject, including one with Bishop Robert Barron, and I think he mentioned it there as well. And I said right there, kind of connecting it to the Marxists, what does Jesus say to Satan? Man does not live by bread alone, but but on every word from the mouth of God. And I said the communists act as if man does live by bread alone, and if you could just solve the economic problem, then you'll solve the human problem. And again, Peterson kind of jumped out of his seat on that point because he understood that. So in all here, you have this Canadian intellectual who now is gone on to become internationally famous, and I didn't realize until that interview, in part because I didn't know enough about him ahead of time, how much communism and the evil of that has drawn him into this point in the Christian faith. You probably knew this because you've seen him more than me. But and some of our fellow students, in fact, in our Marxism course, right, Ben Chamberlain is a huge fan of Jordan Peterson. So people who follow him know that, but it was something I didn't know and became very aware of as we talked.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. The problem with Marxism, which of course Peterson understands, and this is a Christian idea, is that human beings have dignity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
human beings are made in the image of God. They have dignity, and that's why there can't just be an economic band-aid stamped on every problem, and why that's not possible. So another really interesting thing.
Yeah, and also about that point in the interview when we were talking about all of those things, I brought up because I knew he wanted to go there. Well, I guess we didn't talk ahead of time, but I figured he wanted to go there because of his past with cancel culture and everything else. I mentioned the oppressed oppressor model and then brought that to gender and race-based Marxism and critical race theory. And you probably notice he really lit up at that too, because he understood that what the modern Marxists are doing isn't so much applying this to economics and class, but to culture, gender, race, and the whole idea. I mean, the unbelievably simplistic and racist idea by the race-based Marxists and the critical race theory people that you can easily divide people into one of two categories, right? Black versus white. And if you're black, you're oppressed. And if you're white, the oppressor. So, here's Kobe Bryant and Oprah Winfrey, right? Tell them that they're oppressed, right? And then that white homeless guy that they just went past, right? That he's their oppressor. They'd be like, come again? How does that happen? Well, the answer isn't because of your money or your status, or it's strictly because of the color of your skin. You're black, you're oppressed. He's white, you're the oppressor. And they'd be the first to tell you, man, you are out of your smoking mind. You're crazy. But that's as crazy as Marx and Engels looking at the entire world as proletariat versus bourgeoisie. And if you can boil everything down to economics and class, and the race-based Marxists boil it all down to race. But of course, what we really are is human beings made in the image of God, the imago Dei. And as Martin Luther King Jr. said, as Wyatt T. Walker, the close associate of King, who's talked about King and critical race theory. In fact, Walker said, Walker and also David Garrow, who's the King biographer, who I've emailed with and interviewed about King, they both point out CRT came after Martin Luther King Jr. So he didn't even know about CRT because it came later. But they both said he would have completely rejected any race-based classification of human beings, right? He said you're judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. But what CRT and the race-based Marxists do is they judge you by the color of your skin. And that's all that matters. And it's hideous. It's racist is what it is, ironically.
It is, absolutely. And I think that is why Jordan Peterson finds this so fascinating too, from the intellectual standpoint of looking at all of what you just explained, which is very prevalent now, how pervasive Marx's ideology has been in getting there, and how going all the way back to Marx and what you wrote about in your book, how that led to where we are now is very fascinating. And Peterson found the book really fascinating. And he said that throughout the interview, as he should. It was an amazing book. It is fascinating, and everyone should read it if they haven't. But just before we finish the interview, do you have any closing thoughts just from your experience with Peterson, and just any final takeaways?
Well, I would say, okay, three words: universities, 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 right? I mean, Peterson came out of that milieu, which has been, the universities, the colleges have been just completely corrupted by the left and by these hideous ideas, right? And, I'm speaking to you right now. The backdrop here is Grove City College. And
That's a good one.
yeah, that's right, where you
And you
graduated in May. Yeah, and in
turned out
fact,
okay, I think.
in fact, our American Spectator print edition on education that Peterson held up at the start of that interview, we recommend 24 colleges, I think. That's the best we could recommend, Grace, out of 4,000 colleges in America, right? 24 safe spaces to send your conservative Christian kid. And one of them was Grove City College. But he realizes just what a corrupting influence the universities have been. And these ideas have crawled out of the university because they don't crawl out naturally from the coal mines or the steel mills or the factories, the farms. I mean, you have to indoctrinate people with this warped ideology to even get them to think in this way to begin with. I mean, no one is naturally going to wake up in the morning or walk around their environment, their surroundings, and think, oh, what I see here in this world and all of our kind of the earth, the cosmos is bourgeoisie, proletariat, right? Black, white, male, female, right? How can I wipe out everything that exists and restructure the world around this like binary thing here. By the way, the left is completely against binary when it comes to male, female gender options, right? There's now like over 100 of those.
Sure.
But when it comes to oppressed oppressor model, they're all in when it
It's
comes to the
called it's
gender
called
market.
convenient and inconvenient facts.
Right, right. You know, contradiction here, contradiction there. That's okay, whatever it makes to get the ideology to line up. But he understands the corrupting influence of ideology. I know we're wrapping up the interview, but we talked a little bit about Russell Kirk too. And you know, you had my conservatism course at Grove City College, and Kirk, like I don't know how much Kirk Jordan Peterson has read or would have read. But Kirk talked about the dangers of ideology, right? And how ideology truly comes from the left. And Kirk also talked about order. In fact, he said conservatism really ought to be defined not as an ideology, but an attitude about conservatism is based in this idea of an enduring moral order. And you'll see in Peterson's writings, going back several years, that order is a big thing for him.
Thank you so much for watching. First and foremost, be sure to check out the interview that Dr. Kengor did with Jordan Peterson. It's worth the watch. You can find it on Jordan Peterson's channels, and it's just in-depth, thought-provoking, and definitely, again, worth the watch. Secondly, make sure that you get and read The Devil and Karl Marx if you haven't already. It will teach you so much about Marx's life, his background, and the reasons that you should care about that is because a lot of the ideologies that we see taking over the West today, from college campuses to just what's propelled the left further to the left, are explained by where the ideology came from in the first place. So be sure to read Dr. Paul Kengor's book, The Devil and Karl Marx. It's really, really insightful and worth reading. And lastly, if you're watching on social media, be sure to go to spectator.org to check out the American Spectator, to read this article, the article associated with this video. And if you're watching from the website, be sure to check out the American Spectator's social media and to like, share, and subscribe to this video. Thank you so much. I'm Grace Reilly, and it was a pleasure to have you with us today.